how did he convince his followers that he had any authority or, sort of like divine blessing to be telling us what truth is? Like, what made anyone pay attention to this guy?
Yeah, no, he claimed it was all a research trail. He claimed he was doing scientific research. He didn't come at this from a prophet status. In other words, he didn't come at it as though he was, giving divine revelation. Hubbard's assertions were always that his discoveries were an outgrowth or a product of his research, and that he was researching and studying man as a spiritual entity, right? And that originally with Dianetics, as you'll recall, it was a science of the mind. So Hubbard wasn't making spiritual claims with Dianetics. He was making mental claims about the modern science of mental health. People had some gain from some of those practices. Again, a small percentage of people who tried it liked it. So they said, well, there must be something to this. Hubbard must be on to something. He must be a good researcher. And he claimed that he was an independent scientist, basically, a non-funded, self-funding sort of scientist. And when Dianetics came out, he continued doing research and lecturing frequently, weekly, and claiming that he was doing case studies and he was tracking the progress of people with different Dianetics techniques. And they were trying this and they were trying that. And when the second book came out, called Science of Survival in 1951, it was subtitled Faster, Simplified Dianetic Techniques. So it was continuing the idea that he was generating a science through research. Through those researches, Hubbard got people to take him seriously about the spiritual claims because he said that what was coming up in the research was past lives. He wasn't insisting that people had past lives, they were. And he was the one, he said, who just had to follow where the research took him, because he's being a good scientist. And we already know that his researches, quote unquote, had zero to do with case studies. There was no peer review, and that he was asking very leading questions and driving people where he wanted them to go in their counseling sessions. So it wasn't real research, but this was how Hubbard drummed up support for himself as he was a philosopher and a researcher.
That's fascinating.
Through those methods that he claimed to be an authority figure.
That is fascinating because for a couple of reasons. One is, I do have a PhD. I have done science or social science research. And I understand that, just understanding how statistics work, most people in the world are never going to be able to fully understand how statistics work. And then from there to become scientifically literate. So it's just a bar that a huge percent of the world is just never going to obtain. So it sounds like he did this sophisticated play that I don't know who else has done this successfully. Instead of just claiming divine authority, which is sort of a shortcut or a cop-out to sort of gaining authority, he's basically relying on the authority of science, but his interpretation of science, which is actually pseudoscience. So he's borrowing on the virtue of science, which is that science is evidence-based and empirically supported, so that everybody who doesn't have the interest or the ability or the intellect or the luxury or the privilege of really understanding science, so that those people that can't really engage scientifically think that they're engaging in something scientific and credible and empirically supported. But in reality, it's just pseudoscience. So he's borrowing on the virtues of science while not being scientific, and then discrediting anything scientifically valid if it doesn't align with his pseudoscience. That's a real mind cluster F, if I can say that.
It is. And that was exactly how he maintained the con for all those decades, because he counted on people's ignorance, their inability to do fact-checking, especially pre-internet. He had no concept that the internet was coming, ever. He claimed to have all this knowledge about past intergalactic civilizations, but he never anticipated the internet. You know, I mean, like, come on, dude. But he didn't, he didn't anticipate any of that stuff. And he often made these wild ass claims, but he would make them on the basis that this was stuff that had come up in people's auditing sessions. And the implication was that it had come up in more than one person's auditing session. So therefore, it was being cross-verified, right? These information about past civilizations and about past lives and about our spiritual abilities. And all of this was coming from research, from doing auditing and this counseling on people and taking them into these past lives. And if you look at how Hubbard did his auditing, you see that he led them down the garden path, but he was pretty crafty about it. And they thought that they were coming up with their own memories when he was clearly implanting or making suggestions about them. So he was clever. He was canny, and not everybody bought into this. I mean, mind you, there were more people who came in and left Scientology over the years than are still in it. But for the people who would believe it, come in and watch it and be part of it for a while, they would buy into this stuff. And that included my parents. They definitely, my dad went all in on this. And my dad was one of the smartest people I've ever known. He was a smart cookie. But intelligence doesn't have anything to do with it. Like I said, you help somebody and you can convince them of all kinds of things.
Yeah.